In a beautiful wilderness, the story begins by showing a deer relaxing, suddenly stabbed by a young man whose whole body is black, and a group of children and one adult appear who turns out to be one family. The father cut up the deer's body and smeared the blood on the young man's face and told him to eat the deer's liver as a sign that he was now officially a grown man.
Is a man.
His name is Ben. A father who has a unique idea of how to raise and educate his children who emerged from the age of their first child was 3 years old. Where Ben's thoughts decide to escape from social life and society by living in the forest. He has his own view that the modern world can cause the mental decline of humans. So as a way to protect offspring as a form of affection, Ben finally decided to raise his children in the wild. This idea arose not because of reckless capital. However, due to the fact that Ben is someone who is intellectually intelligent and has the skills trained to live in the wild. Ben trains all his children to survive in the wild, and also provides formal education from school textbooks that Ben has brought. How amazing! It was proven that they all turned out to be much smarter academically than children who studied in formal schools because Ben not only taught them how to read and count but taught all the sciences such as physics, biology, law, history, philosophy, and politics that make their children have much higher knowledge than adults though. And the uniqueness is that Ben and his wife claim that they give their children names that are very rare and the only ones in the world, like the eldest named Bodvan, then his brothers Kelir, Vesper, Nye, Relian, and lastly Zaja. Every morning Ben and his children always exercise to train the cardiovascular system or blood circulation organs such as the heart, so that Ben's children have healthy bodies. For example, his eldest son, Bodvan, has an athletic body and is ideal for his age. To meet some needs that require money, Ben and his children make handicrafts and sell them to souvenir shops, and they have a bus which they use to go to the nearest settlement to sell these handicrafts. Arriving at the souvenir shop, something happened that made Bodvan awkward, when Bodvan ran into several girls he had never met in the forest. Spontaneously, Bodvan, who is now growing up, begins to feel fondness for the opposite sex, and this is realized by Ben's father, who encourages Bodvan to be more confident next time.
Are you coming in?
From last time?
Great.
Long story short, Bodvan secretly went to his mother's private mailbox and found letters from several world-famous universities. How surprised he was to find out that he had been accepted by all these universities, and that of course would not be approved by his father Ben, who wanted his children to live in the wild untouched by the modern world. At the same time, Ben called Harper, his wife's sister, who told him that his wife Leslie had died by suicide. It is known that Ben's wife has been in a mental hospital for more than 3 months due to suffering from a mental disorder in the form of bipolar, which made him suffer from severe depression so that he was desperate to slash his own veins. Honestly, openly, as it is, without further ado and without the slightest hesitation, Ben immediately told his children that he had just received news of their mother's death due to suicide by slashing her own veins. And spontaneously it immediately made them all cry hysterically. And amazingly Ben demands that they should not be sad and stay positive with their usual routines and activities because someone's death will have no effect on what they are currently living. The next day while at the bar, Ben gets a call from his father-in-law who blames Ben for the death of his beloved son Leslie. Because his carelessness and arrogance caused his wife to die, Leslie's father forbade Ben to attend his wife's funeral and was threatened with imprisonment if he persisted in attending. So this is proof that his father-in-law really hates Ben for his unique ideas.
We'll have you arrested. You are not welcome here.
Ben also said if the idea to live like this was not his own desire but the decision of himself and Leslie. And Ben also asked that Leslie's body not be buried but cremated as Leslie had willed.
To be cremated, not buried.
Returning to the forest while they were having lunch, Zaja also appeared naked, which was common in this family. Ben teaches his children not to cover up anything, including clothes, so that their children don't think dirty and see things that are taboo as normal. But for mealtime, Ben tells Zaja to dress like the preset rules. The next morning arrived. Ben is awakened by the figure of his wife who appears in his dream. Outside the house the children have gathered and advise Ben to attend his mother's funeral as a final tribute. Of course, Ben couldn't do that because he received threats from his father-in-law. If he was seen at the funeral, then Ben would immediately be arrested by the police.
Too risky.
Ben ignored his children's requests and distracted them by taking them on a very, very steep rock climb. All the children do rock climbing including Si Bungsu Nai who is still 7.5 years old. At that time there was also a life-threatening incident when the rail's handle fell off and hit a rock which dislocated his wrist. In fact, Ben does this activity not only to divert sadness but to train their mentality so that from a young age their children have a strong mentality to live in this harsh world. Suddenly it rained and made them all drenched under the pouring rain, cold and forced not to take shelter. But that's when Ben suddenly felt sorry and decided to grant his children's request to attend his mother's funeral. For the first time, Bodvan and his siblings entered the city streets where they could only imagine and see from the books they read. So, this is the most amazing experience they have ever had in their lives. Entering an urban street where there are police, Ben was stopped by a police officer who was on patrol because the taillights of his KIR bus were out. When the police officer saw Ben's children on the bus, he asked, "Aren't your kids going to school?" This question certainly makes Ben a little worried because the laws and regulations of child protection in the United States are very strict. If Ben is known to be not responsible for his child's education, of course he will be arrested and his children will be taken by the government. Immediately Ben was quite amazed when the ideas in his education so far were not in vain, where the person who understood this situation immediately said that he and his younger siblings were homeschooling or studying at home, which he then read a verse from the Bible, followed by singing, which was followed by all his younger siblings. So when the officer began to feel uncomfortable, he immediately left and invited Ben to continue his journey. Long story short, they are hungry, sign their stomachs must be filled. And I don't know what Ben was thinking. He went to a supermarket to steal some food such as vegetables, bread, and others. Ben claims that this action is part of a distraction so that his children are not too saddened by the death of his mother. But in my personal opinion, I object because apart from distraction, this is clearly not true and very bad for the mental health of all of them, whatever the reason.
I'm fine now.
After successfully stealing food, they all stop by the lake for a bite to eat, and Ben also has a surprise birthday cake to celebrate the birthday of Noam Chomsky, a human rights activist who Ben thinks deserves to be celebrated. Relian, who has a strong character and is different from his brothers, also raised a criticism and objected to the ridiculous celebration. According to him, they should all celebrate Christmas like Americans do in general, not celebrate someone they don't even know.
Crazy person celebrates Noam Chomsky's birthday.
As an agnostic, Ben immediately gave a clear answer that instead of celebrating a fictional fairy tale, it is better to celebrate the life of someone, Noam Chomsky, who has fought for human rights, which can't be denied by Relian, who immediately left with a slightly annoyed face. Long story short, Ben stopped by at the house of his wife's sister, Harper. There they were immediately entertained with dinner with their husband and two sons, Harper, who also joined the dinner. Suddenly a chat appeared that made Harper surprised. One of them, when I asked, "How did Harper kill the chicken that was on the table?" The question immediately surprised Harper because he did not expect that the youngest, who was only 6 years old, would ask such a question. So Harper had to explain in detail how he was crossed over the dinner. Then Harper's son asked Harper how Leslie died. Harper also answered subtly and covered up the actual cause of death. Ben actually answered openly that his wife died of suicide by slashing her own veins. Suddenly this made Harper and husband surprised because explaining such taboo things in front of the children, Harper and husband finally became unappetizing and chose to leave the dining table.
Excuse me.
There was a bit of a scuffle after dinner where Ben, who lives openly and as he is, doesn't want to lie about anything, especially in front of the kids. But in the end, Ben apologized for not being able to adjust to the city's way of life and the rules of this house, which both Harper and her husband accepted.
Sorry it doesn't live up to your high standards.
Soon the children appeared making bed sheets where they would all sleep in the yard right under the stars. Since childhood they were used to sleeping in nature accompanied by crickets and stars in the sky.
Sleeping under the stars.
Morning arrived. When the children were playing with Harper and the husband started a topic of conversation that they had wanted to share long ago where they explained that Ben's children must be sent to formal schools in order to get a proper education, career, developmentally, morals, knowledge, social, ethics, can think logically, and others. And what was Ben's answer? He did not answer the question with words but with direct evidence examples by calling the two Harper children who were definitely formal schools, where they were both asked about human rights laws which of course made the two children nervous because their studies and brains had not yet reached that far. Ben also called Zaja. He was 7 years old and had never received a formal education, where when Zaja was asked what is human rights law, Zaja also answered well and correctly. Long story short, Ben and the children continued their journey to their mother's funeral. After that moment, Harper and her husband never again mentioned about Ben's children's school because even those of us who watched it would know what the outcome would be. Halfway to Mexico where his wife's funeral is being held, Ben decides to spend the night at a common traveler's retreat. Coincidentally there, the eldest Bodvan again felt awkward when he saw a beautiful girl and her family resting in the same place. Bodvan also shows off his muscles to attract the girl's attention by doing breathing movements that are usually done right in front of the girl, which eventually makes the girl become interested and want to take her alone. Even though she seems tacky, strange, and doesn't know anything about the modern world, the girl is actually attracted to the Bodavish uniqueness that ordinary city boys don't have. Finally that night Bodvan got a kiss that made him fall in love for the first time. The Bodvan who was taught by Ben to be responsible, spontaneously met the girl's mother and asked the girl to marry right in front of her own mother. After being separated from the girl for a while, Bodvan and his family continued their journey until they arrived at the place of his mother's funeral. Their arrival was enough to make the mother-in-law and the guests there very surprised. After listening to the pastor's lecture, he immediately came forward carrying a piece of paper in his hand which was a will written by his late wife Leslie before he died. In the letter, Leslie stated that he did not want to be buried but instead was cremated and his ashes had to be spread out in the wild and the rest had to be put in the nearest toilet. Suddenly it made his father-in-law and the guests surprised and immediately called his bodyguards to throw him out. Outside the church when the event was over, Ben was asked not to attend the funeral and was threatened with immediate imprisonment if he persisted in doing so. But his father and mother-in-law seemed happy when they finally got to meet their grandchildren for the first time. However, Ben, who still wants to fulfill his late wife's wish, orders his children to get on the bus and thwart the funeral. Ben followed his wife's hearse to the funeral. The children who realized their father would be arrested by the police shouted to stop this mission because after their mother left them they didn't want to lose one more person, namely their own father. Ben and the children spent the night in a location not far from the father-in-law's house. Bodvan finally decided to speak out about one thing that had been hidden for a long time, namely about his acceptance letter at several major universities in the world. It turned out that his desire for college did not come from himself but his late mother's request so that Bodvan could develop and live a normal life like most people in general.
Did you have high math, theoretical? I'm a freak because of you!
After that, Nye appeared who gave Relian a letter about her going to Grandpa and Grandma's house. Ben and the children immediately went there to pick up Relian who was busy playing games and was sure of his decision to live with his grandpa and grandpa. His father-in-law said that he had hired a lawyer to take over custody of the children. After hearing the story from Relian he was very shocked to hear that Ben had ordered them to do some illegal and dangerous activities, such as reading cliffs when it rained, stealing in supermarkets and others, so that his in-laws think that Ben is irresponsible and could endanger the lives of his grandchildren.
I hate you!
Relian is legally old enough to choose.
Then Ben pretended to be allowed to leave, which he had secretly devised a plan to take Relian away, by sending a Vesper to pick him up, with a plan told to go up to the roof of the house. However, because the tiles were slippery, Vesper fell and suffered serious injuries. The doctor said that the Vesper had fractured bones where he was quite amazed by the physical condition of the Vesper that did not suffer serious injuries after falling from that height. This is not without reason, because since childhood Ben's children have been trained physically and mentally to have different body strength and endurance from most children in general. This incident also made Ben finally realize and succumb to himself that he might not be worthy to take care of and protect his children. In the end Ben succumbed to his ego and decided to let the children live at his grandparents' house. They were all gathered and explained the reason why everything had to end like this, that he couldn't protect them, he didn't deserve to be a good father to them, because it had made the Vesper was injured, but it was immediately denied by all of them. That last night's incident was an ordinary accident that in essence they did not want to be separated from their only beloved father. Even so Ben remained strong in his belief to leave them all with grandparents. Ben also took all the belongings of the children and entrusted them to the father-in-law. And for the last time Ben said goodbye and asked father-in-law to look after the kids, took them all hunting because they liked it. And one more thing, because he didn't have the money, Ben asked his father-in-law to pay for Bode Van to study at a famous university because he had been accepted in many famous universities. In the end, Ben has to accept the fact that he doesn't deserve to be a father. Finally he had to be a man alone with all the loved ones who are now no longer with him. Ben also stopped by a convenience store to buy food and a shaving machine and decided to shave off all his beard that had grown all over his face. Located in a place far from the city, Ben sat alone contemplating in front of the bonfire. Then he was surprised by the appearance of the children who had been hiding right in the storage room of the bus. Reliant apologizes for being selfish and the children agreed to continue their mission of cremating the body of their late mother. They all went straight to the cemetery to dismantle his coffin and do what the mother had requested during her lifetime. After burning their mother's body and scattering some of the ashes, they all went to the nearest toilet, which happened to be at an airport. According to his mother's will, they all dumped the rest of the ashes right in the airport toilet.
Bye, Mommy!
Not only that, it turns out that Bode Van has made a decision to go to Namibia, a country in southern Africa, to adventure, to face challenges and seek as much experience as possible. Ben just left a message so that Bode Van always takes good care of himself. The film ends with all of them now living in a small house in the countryside not too far from the city. Ben has lowered his ego and idealism a bit by keeping a simple life but still being able to coexist with the modern world so that his children don't go out of fashion. The message that we can take from this film is that family is like a branch of a tree that grows in different directions but the roots stay together. Thank you, see you in the next video, bye bye.